MP Gillian Keegan, a member of the Public Accounts Committee. I mean, what seems quite extraordinary is that even more contracts were thrown at this company back after July the 10th profits warning. There was one on the 10th, another on the 17th, and yet another on the 18th. I mean, how many contracts were they prepared to throw at it to try and save it?
Well, I think, obviously we have a concentration of within this supplier. And I would imagine that, when you're faced with that situation, you don't normally pull out because of a profits warning. But I guess the way they contracted those last couple of contracts, they did actually have a sort of contingency risk-sharing arrangement in there where the contracts where other suppliers had to
But it has a feel of panic, doesn't it? I mean, come on, let's try another one. Well, one more. Well, yet another. Let's try.
I would doubt it, but I would imagine there are things. I mean, government procurement takes a long time, so I would imagine there were things that were already in train and were already well in train. And I guess, you've also got to be conscious as a government of signalling to the marketplace as well. So it is quite a complex set of situations. And actually, given the breadth of business that already is with this company, in a way, the biggest concern is not actually the last three contracts, but it's actually the concentration and the high number of contracts across many different departments within one, within one company.
Let me ask you, Andrea Adonis. I mean, did you sniff trouble, and is that one of the reasons why you left?
No, I didn't have anything to do with Carillion, because that's the letter of contracts, and I'm afraid I read about these contracts in the newspapers. However, what I was struck by at the time when these contracts were awarded after the profits warning is it was quite controversial at the time. The Financial Times, the reputable business newspaper, said at the time that this was a high-risk strategy, because what happened, remember, is that when you had the first profits warning, Carillion's share price went down by 70%. This wasn't an ordinary profits warning. This was a declaration of crisis at the company, a really serious crisis. The share price collapsed. The chief executive left, which is always a sign that that really serious situation has developed. And then what happened was Chris Grayling let the HS2 contract, which was the first of them, a 450 million contract in respect of Carillion, and the share price then went up by nearly 20%. And the FT itself reported that this was, as it saw it, a lifeline to the company, which the government was giving, and high risk. Now, as soon as I read that, I thought, well, I wouldn't be doing this if I was the minister. I've done his job. I would absolutely not have taken the risk of putting a big contract the way of a company where the chief executive had just gone and you'd had a major profits warning.
Isn't one of the problems when we look at this, I mean, even if you manage to get 25% small and medium-sized businesses to step into this void, the fact is, at the moment, we have, as I said to the minister, we've got, perhaps 10 maximum of these big companies, but they don't really appear to be the right kind of device to deliver such extraordinarily complex and different contracts. I mean, anything from building a school to a hospital to running a railway. I mean, this isn't really a clever idea, is it?
Yeah, well, I think that's probably the heart of their downfall, actually. They've probably overexpanded, and their diversification strategy.
Encouraged to do so by the government, though. I mean, the government wanted the infrastructure, and so, come on, here's a company willing to do it.
Well, I mean, it's not the only supplier of this kind of infrastructure. There are others as well.
Not many.
But actually, they consolidated, right? They bought a lot of companies within the sector. So almost by default, you've got this kind of consolidation. And, consolidation happens in industries a lot, particularly where you've got price-sensitive kind of procurement and economies of scale matter. And it's something that will need to be looked at, because sometimes that can go too far. And as we've seen, it's left them exposed.
But you were in government, in fact, of course, when the first of these contracts were sort of let, and you wonder, was this a clever way to do things? Wasn't it better to have more dependable, smaller companies doing a more diverse quantity of work?
Well, we do need many more smaller companies which are contracting. But let's be clear, when I was responsible and we were contracting, we were not contracting with companies with major profits warnings, where there was an imminent risk of collapse. You see, the big issue, which we need to pay attention to, because it may only be 2% of their work, but let's be clear, it's £2 billion worth of contracts that were entered into after the profits warning. And my own view is that there will need to be a public inquiry about this, because the issue of value for money for the taxpayers and entering into those contracts with a company which just by reading the Financial Times, is in a desperate state, I think that's going to be a very major issue in politics.
A very brief question. I mean, is this soluble? I mean, can all these contracts be rescued? And what about the workers?
Well, I mean, the workers is obviously the first, and the pensioners indeed. In fact, my father worked for this company for his whole career, so he's sitting there worried about his pension as well. So, for sure the workers, for sure people who are relying on the pensions. In terms of can they be rescued? There's still, the markets that they were in actually are good markets. There's still a lot more construction. There's still a lot more need for these services to be run. It's not like they're contracting; they're expanding. So yes, in theory, there should be a good market for someone to step into. And there are other companies, and in the case of as Lord Adonis said, the ones that have recently been let, they were contractually let in a way that the other suppliers, there was a consortium, and they have responsibility already within the contract to take over the work of Carillion, and that was how they dealt with that difficult situation of whether to provide a lifeline or be the death knell.
Gillian Keegan, Lord Adonis, thank you both very much for coming in.